start sweating.
Q&A Wednesday!
Today it's all about the residential driveway. That's okay. So we're talking about residential driveways today. And you can extend this to some light commercial,
Yeah.
but this is more residential. And the reason why we're talking residential is because most of the time residential driveway, 3,500 to 4,500
Maybe.
PSI,
Yeah.
4 to 6 inch slump-ish.
Up to some close to a 0.7 on the water cementitious.
Oh, nobody goes that freaking
come
high.
on. We saw one.
0.64. That's the highest I'll allow.
0.64.
That's the reality
That's
check.
too high.
Not for a real. I mean the driveways we're talking about.
Sure.
So well maybe it is the driveways.
I'm just saying.
You did. You. So the 3 questions that we're going to be asking.
That we're going to be answering that we
Addressing.
get asked commonly.
Addressing. The 3 questions we're going to address today are from folks that we've worked with over the years who are in the residential industry.
Mm-hmm.
And the first one is, why is my driveway falling apart only after 2 years?
It's a good question.
It's
And a fair
great.
question.
And there's some great answers to
There
it.
is.
So, it's a very general question. So, why is my driveway falling apart after 2 years? Let's say that driveway is in the great state of Colorado, all the way to Minnesota, including Michigan, maybe some Chicago area, maybe a little bit Ontario or Toronto or Jackson
Utah,
Point.
Idaho.
Places where we have severe freeze thaw,
Mhm.
a lot of de-icing salts, a lot of de-icing brines.
Right.
And then we're gonna call that slab A. And then we have a slab in Italy. Maybe in Piancova. No. Let's say in Rome. In the heart of Rome, a residential driveway. It sees 60 to 80 degrees throughout the year.
Right.
Doesn't ever see ice, or if it does, it's once every 4 or 5 years. No de-icing salts, no de-icing brines. Somewhere between 3,500 and 4,500 PSI, 4 to a 6 inch slump, non-air entrained mix.
Sure, because they don't have to freeze thaw, so they don't need
Worry about
to air
that.
train. Right.
So we're going to call that slab B. So when we're talking about slab E, or was it A?
A.
I always get confused with those letters. You know, there's 28 of them.
26.
26. There was 27. Ampersand.
Oh, is that?
Yeah, it used to be like the 20. That was the Uncle John's Bath and Raider. So anyway, if we are in a residential area where there, it doesn't have to be the homeowner that's using those de-icing
Sure.
salts and brine, but if the slab is placed right before the winter season,
Sure.
and it's not allowed the adequate amount of time to cure and harden and
Sure.
densify, if it sees snow within a few weeks of
It's
being
gonna eat it up,
placed,
yeah.
it's going to chew it up.
It's young concrete. Even if you're not putting any salt on it yourself, you're driving around on, state highways and local highways where they put down really aggressive de-icing salts and brines to keep the roads clear of ice, and you're dragging that back onto your driveway.
And eventually, not only the freezing and thawing, but also those de-icing salts and brines are going to have a pretty nasty impact on your concrete, really
Right.
corroding it from the inside out. And we haven't even talked about water cementitious ratio. Whitney said a 0.64 for the water, 0.7 for the water cementitious ratio, and I rolled my eyes. Blah, 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 blah. The reality is, we saw
Sometimes.
a 6.4,
And it
and
went up to like a 0.68.
no, it did not.
I swear it did.
It went from like a 0.61
Oh, to a
up to
0.61.
0.664.
Like
So
almost
that
four
being
ounces.
that being said, that's still a really high
It's
water
very-
cementitious ratio, which means, it just means it's going to be a weaker,
right.
softer concrete.
Less
that's going to
durable
be
concrete.
it's going to be more porous
Right.
and less durable.
Right.
So that being said, your concrete's going to start, especially if you're in the areas, and this was on the West Coast, in a very cold part of the West Coast,
Mhm.
where they have de-icing salts and
Right.
brines. So the expectation shouldn't have been that the driveway was going to last a long time with a 0.64 water cementitious ratio.
Right.
It should have been, well, we're getting a very inexpensive driveway, and for that we're sacrificing something.
Right.
So why is my driveway falling apart only after 2 years? If it's your Group A driveway scenario, it's because you have a very aggressive environment.
Right.
And most of the residential concrete that's used for driveways are what Whitney will call crapcrete, and what I will call is it does have a place in the industry,
Right.
but the expectation should be if I'm getting a low-end concrete, I should expect low-end performance. And that
Right.
normally means damage not in 2 years, damage may be in 2 months depending on
Right.
when you place it.
Oh,
Now,
absolutely.
that same concrete, if you placed it at the maybe middle, end of spring,
Right.
and gave it that entire summer to hydrate, and then you put a cure and seal on it or just a sealer on it,
Yeah. There's things you can do to make it a lot more durable.
totally last 5 years,
Right.
maybe 10
Right.
years.
Right.
But eventually, if you're gonna pay for a subpar concrete, or if you're gonna get a deal from the contractor,
You're gonna get subpar results. So.
and that should be the expectation. Now, for B, this is a little bit difficult. I mean, it's not going to fall apart. We did this video, a live feed. Oh, by the way, Patchouli, I have a live feed for you that I started yelling at the camera because Zayed asked me a question about putting seawater into concrete. Anyway, the great thing about the Roman Pantheon is not just the technology, it's not just the architecture or the concrete mix or the engineering that went behind it, it's also where it's located. And really, being in Rome, it's one of the best places in the world for concrete. I mean, you have some great materials over there, but more importantly, you don't have the freezing and thawing and then the de-icing salts and de-icing brines
Just a better environment.
that we have to deal with in Colorado or Michigan or Idaho or
Right.
wherever, Russia. I mean, with a 3,500, 4,500 PSI concrete, if your concrete is falling apart after 2 years,
Right.
then it's either one or two things. Contractor just did some shoddy work, and that could be the person making the concrete. They might have gone up to that .70. And then just vehicular traffic
Right.
could have just torn it apart, or it could be that it was close to subpar concrete, but the finish of it, the way the contractor placed it, was subpar, or it was used for something that it hadn't been intended to be used for. And that's the second thing. So it's either the quality of the material that was placed in there, very, very subpar, or it was used for something that it wasn't intended. What I mean by that, a residential driveway that has a lot of heavy vehicle traffic on it. So we have a driveway that was meant to be used as a rural residential driveway. And sometimes we have FedEx trucks,
Right.
big trucks, rolling over it, but I mean, it's a dirt road. If it was a concrete driveway that was
Right.
designed for 3,000 PSI, was 4 inches thick, we should not be surprised when the concrete breaks up, when a FedEx truck, a fully loaded FedEx truck rolls over it, because that's not what it was designed for.
Sure.
So, okay.
Next question.
When can I drive on the concrete? Concrete's too precious. Just let it sit there and look beautiful. Don't drive on it ever.
What I would say probably at least 7 days. I mean, it depends on your mix, but
It depends on your mix. I wouldn't even say 7 days. If they're in some parts of Canada, if they're in parts of New Mexico, where, I mean, the requirement is a certain amount of Class F fly ash, 7 days, I mean,
it's not long enough.
there were places that we used to work up in the mountains where they were using 35% Class F
Right,
fly ash, and at
right.
35 days, even with an accelerator in there, they were not getting more than 2,500 PSI.
Wow.
And you're going to drive on top. I mean, you could totally drive on top of it, but the fatigue of driving back and forth, it depends. And what you could do is you can err on the side of, and here's the thing. People ask, when can I drive on it? Not because they want to leave the concrete sitting longer
Right.
so it can get stronger and be more durable. They ask that question because they want to get on top of the concrete as soon as possible.
Right.
So that goes back to a cost question.
Sure.
Years ago, when I worked for Lafarge, we had created a product called Cornelia Road Patch. And it was a product that we used for fast track pavement for Colorado Department of Transportation, where they wanted to open up the highways or the local state highways, arteries, 4 to 6 hours after the concrete was placed. And that you needed a minimum of 2,500 PSI once you opened it. And these were really thick slabs. So again, I mean, 2,500 PSI is a good starting point, but what we did is at 4 to 6 hours is actually 3,500 psi, to the point to prove the technologies to some of the higher ups. When we did our demo, we backed up a fully loaded concrete mixer onto the slab
Wow.
and burned out the wheels on it. Now that's overkill,
Right.
but 3,500 psi is a great strength to have for rolling on top of concrete. And we're not just talking about deforming the top surface, making the aesthetics get all jacked up, but it's also the structural properties.
Sure.
It's putting that concrete in a bending moment like you would a beam.
Right. Well, and it's not just going to affect the top that you can see. Like it's that force is going all the way through,
And you can have
that's
that
something that I
bending
think
moment.
people don't, especially with residential. You don't
3,
think
4
about
inches, 5 inches.
Right.
So when can I drive on it? You really got to ask your contractor that question. I mean, they have a warranty on it, and you need to put it in writing. When it comes to more expensive concrete, sometimes you're paying 20 to 30% more, but you're paying for that so you can do things like drive on it sooner.
that. Well, and so it'll last that much longer as well.
Right.
And most people don't even know that there are high-end residential mixes. Like most people don't know that they have. I was talking to our embroiderer the other day, and she was like, "There's high-end residential." I was like, "Heck yeah!"
Or you can go light commercial.
Right.
You can get low-end commercial side, and that will be knocking it out of the park.
Right.
Or you can ask them, hey, do you have a fast trap pavement if you need to get on your driveway that quickly? But folks, stay off your freaking driveways. It's not that
Give it
big
time.
a deal. Give it 28 days. If you're unsure of it and you got a deal from your contractor, give it 28 days and don't park on your driveway. Don't do your driveway right before winter starts.
True.
Try to get it right after winter ends and
Right.
give it that full summer to cure, and then put a sealer on it. That's it.
Yeah.
Okay, how does salt damage my driveway? There is a wonderful paper by Dr. Jason Weiss, professor of
Okay.
Jason Weiss, Oregon State University. He was at Purdue at the time.
Okay.
That goes over concrete corrosion. Do you mind if I take this
Yeah,
one?
please.
Most de-icing salts and de-icing brines, and the reason why I'm separating the two is a de-icing salt is something that's considered in its crystal or crunchy or dry state that's usually thrown over the road or your driveway, and a de-icing brine is already in solution. So de-icing salts, I guess calcium chloride,
Right.
potassium chloride or potassium
believe so.
acetate, magnesium chloride I know is
Is
a
a
brine. But we use those to break down the ices and stop the ices or the water from turning into ice. What eventually ends up happening is those salts migrate into the concrete and break down the backbone of concrete strength, the glue that holds concrete together, that gray stuff, the calcium silicate hydrate, into a weaker and more voluminous version of its original self. And what that ends up happening is from within the concrete, the concrete glue just starts expanding, it starts falling apart from within, or it can happen on the top surface, and then ultimately your concrete just kind of starts swelling and expanding. We have some pictures that, shebang! I took a great picture today in Denver of a sidewalk, and that's where it happens the most, on aprons of driveways, and then the sidewalks where people load up all the snow that was sitting on their driveway, collecting all that, or either they were bringing stuff on the driveway and the stuff was dripping onto it, and whatever they're doing, they're collecting these mounds of snow on their sidewalk or right on the apron, and that's where you see the most damage, and it really
Just all
looks
this
like...
pressure just sitting on it.
Right, and well, the stuff migrates into
Right.
it, and then the chemical reaction starts, and it starts becoming this like rounded, voluminous version of that concrete sidewalk or that concrete driveway.
And then it just breaks apart eventually.
Oh, totally. You see it happen at joints too.
Sure.
So that's what salts are going to do to your... The best way to take care of it is to, what?
Get a decent grade concrete.
Pour it
decent
at the
quality
end of the
concrete.
spring or
Right.
end of winter, beginning of spring. Let it cure 28 days at a minimum, and then put a sealer on it
Right.
before winter, and rip and strip that sealer every season. Thank you for your time. We had a great time here. Q&A Wednesday. Go concrete.
Beat asphalt.
I believe in today.